Who here is ready to get ready for Copilot for Microsoft 365? I can't see if any of your hands are up. I'm assuming that they all are. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Schnall. I'm a senior product marketing manager on the Copilot marketing team. I've got some wonderful colleagues with me today, Brian and Gabe, who will introduce themselves in a bit. And we're here to try to help you get ready for Copilot for Microsoft 365. We've got a pretty good agenda where we will actually talk about some of the core concepts, which hopefully everybody in this room knows. We'll also level set what the requirements are for using Copilot for Microsoft 365. Then Brian will get into helping you optimize information access and, more importantly, prevent things like oversharing. And then we'll hand it over to Gabe, who will finish it up with some adoption, best practices, and some guidance, and some resources as well. We may or may not have time for questions at the end, but if we don't get to your questions, we do have Ask the Experts happening right after this, where Brian will be, and then I'll be also in the expo hall at the Microsoft booth with Gabe afterwards as well. All right, let's talk about some core concepts. I am guessing, and in fact, I'm hoping that most of you already know almost everything I'm about to say. If you don't, that kind of makes it even better, because now you are learning some very important core concepts that we have. Some of this, for some of you, may seem very basic, but given the rapidity of Copilot coming on the scene and the rapid changes and the evolution of it, I think it's important that we all sort of reground ourselves, if you'll forgive the pun, and level set on what the basics are of Copilot. So, most of you may know that Copilot for Microsoft 365 is a very powerful new tool. It's not even a year old, that leverages the power of large language models. We partner with a company called OpenAI, and through OpenAI, we have several different types of large language models that we use. We use the GPT, the generative kind that is behind Copilot for Microsoft 365, but we also use other models like DALL-E for image generation, Codex for GitHub Copilot, and so forth. We partner with OpenAI. So OpenAI makes the LLMs, but we have private instances of these LLMs that we manage in our own data centers. These LLMs are stateless, as we'll talk about in a moment, but the key is that when you are interfacing with Copilot for Microsoft 365, you're not interfacing with OpenAI, you're interfacing with us inside the Microsoft 365 service boundary. So, what is a large language model? Well, it's a form of artificial intelligence. In this case, what is typically referred to as generative AI, because it can generate, it can create things based on prompts or commands that you give it to do. Large language models refer to three things: the amount of data that's used to train the model, the size of the model itself, and the size of its neural networks, or what are sometimes called transformers as well. LLMs, and in fact, Copilot in particular, is extensible. We have several sessions here that are covering extensibility, but in brief, we'll talk about that in a moment. The language model, though, that's the key. The language model is really this probabilistic statistical model that is nothing more than the probability of words appearing together. It learns that probability by being trained on data, all sorts of data. A lot of data from the internet, for example, or digitized books, or Reddit forums, or other places as well. The more legitimate data that you can use to train these models, the better they are at producing viable and valid output for you. Now, what can large language models do? Well, we typically say that they have these skills. They can do things like generate content. They can also augment content, so they can finish things. They could finish a paragraph or a white paper, or, as I always like to say, this sentence. They can also do other things. They can classify, they can transform, they can translate. And in addition to these individual skills, you can also combine these skills to do some pretty sophisticated things. You know, educators could use them to create lesson plans, for example, that also include test materials. Other people can use them for all sorts of advanced purposes, like financial analysis using Copilot in Excel. Or maybe some of you even use this new technology to plan your trip here to Orlando. The example there is where in Orlando can I stay that has a good running path next to it. That's just one example. You might even be using it to plan your extra conference events as well. The key here, though, is that there are a lot of things that this technology can do, some of which are surprising and can be quite amazing, and it can make you think that this technology has more awareness or more understanding than it actually does. And in fact, it doesn't. One of the key aspects, again, is Copilot is powered by LLM, the OpenAI LLM. We have private instances of it in our data center. It is optimized, and optimized isn't really the best word, but it's the word we use. It's specifically designed to interact with you as if it were another human. And in fact, the model has been reinforced by human behavior. And it's been oriented and geared towards providing you with responses that sound like it's coming from a human. It's very good at mimicry. You may have heard many others at this conference describe Copilot as a new employee or a new intern that you have to explain things to do, and then it can go off and do some fantastic things for you. That's an apt comparison. And Copilot does come pre-trained up to a certain point, but you still have to be able to unleash those capabilities by giving it the instructions that produce the results that you want. And those instructions will vary depending on what you're trying to do and the surface in which you're trying to do it. A couple other key things, the LLM is pre-trained up to a certain point. It may have data that is not newer than, say, the year 2021 or the year 2023. And up until that, it doesn't know anything else. But beyond that data set that it uses, you can provide it with additional information. That's simply called grounding. Grounding is where you say, hey, search the web for information not in your data set. Or when you're in a work environment, search my graph for information that's obviously not in your data set. And the LLMs are stateless. So anything that you provide it outside of its data set is not retained as part of its data set. It forgets it. It has no memory. It's incapable of being modified. All you can do is extend it by pointing to new information it doesn't already have. Some other things to keep in mind, and this is getting into the more important but finer details, Copilot doesn't understand words. We can give it words, and it can spit out words, but it doesn't understand the meaning of any of those words. Human understanding, human meaning is simply too complex for an LLM. So while it sounds like it knows what it's doing and thinking, it's not. If the words appear to make sense, Copilot will present it to you as if it were accurate. And by the way, this is not a Copilot thing. This is an LLM thing. Okay? LLMs do not understand these. And as a result of that, it can create what are called hallucinations. And that's simply when the LLM just provides information that is simply not true. But it's doing that because that's what it's designed to do. If you say, for instance, write a paper and give me citations, all of the citations it produces could be false. And it's only doing that in the form of citations because you told it to, or rather, because you asked it to. And hallucinations are super critical to keep in mind because, as you may have noticed, in Copilot, in every service that we always have this note that says, AI-generated content may be inaccurate. You need to check it for accuracy and truthfulness. Now, there are ways, there's prompt engineering that you can do to guide Copilot towards accurate answers, but there's today no known way to eliminate hallucinations. So keep that in mind. Always verify the Copilot output. And this is a serious thing. In fact, just yesterday, there was an article online about a lawyer who got disbarred because he put forth a motion to a court that had all of these case citations in it, and every single one of the citations had been fabricated by the LLM that they used to generate it. So they got in a lot of trouble for that. That is a serious violation of ethics there. Now, of course, in the corporate environment, things are a little different, but the fact remains the same. You do need to verify all output that you get from Copilot for accuracy. Don't just blindly trust what it provides you. It can be very difficult to figure out when a hallucination occurs, and that can lead to a problem called over-reliance. Over-reliance is when an end user simply loses the ability to tell whether or not it should trust the AI or it should trust the output from the AI. So that's a very valid problem to look out for, which is why it's important that you not only look at Copilot's responses, but also any citations that it provides, any files, emails, articles, websites, et cetera, that it might cite as part of its response. It's super critical, not only that you validate the output, but especially in cases where you find the output to be invalid, you want to use the feedback controls. That's the thumbs up and the thumbs down controls that we have in every experience that we have. That is super important, especially the thumbs down control. The thumbs down tells us that something went wrong, and you can give us information that, if you opt into, can also include things like screenshots and context and other information, provided your administrator allows you to send that over to us. But if you do that, we can look into that and see what went wrong and try to figure out how to prevent that from happening in the future. So that feedback mechanism is super important, not just for your success, but to help us make Copilot better as well. All right, let's talk about the Copilot experiences, because there's a few of them all over the place. So we've got basically the chat experience, and we've got the Canvas or the app experience. The chat experience, here you can see this is just copilot.microsoft.com. I'm logged in only with an MSA, only with a Microsoft account. So you might notice that there's no web and work toggle up there, because this is the MSA only experience, or the consumer experience. Then we have the copilot.microsoft.com that is Entra ID enabled, but does not require a Copilot for Microsoft 365 license. Here you'll see the work web toggle will show up. And then if you do have the full Copilot for Microsoft 365 license, you get the full experience that you see here as well. Now, I'll just pop out of full screen mode to show you that what you're seeing here is what used to be called BizChat or Business Chat. Of course, today we all know it as Microsoft Copilot, but you'll see vestiges of BizChat and Business Chat in different places. And I bring that up specifically because for some of those different places, like auditing or e-discovery or communication compliance, or some of the other features that you'll use in Purview, they're still looking at things that might say Biz Chat. So you can see that this was a business chat entry. Or they might see something that says App Chat, and that's your indicator that this is something that happened in the Canvas. In other words, in one of our apps like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, or so forth. And then there's solutions built around Copilot for Microsoft 365. And that includes things like Copilot for sales, Copilot for service, Copilot for finance, and whatnot. And these are very tailored offerings that include Copilot, but they're for these specific use cases as well. Let's talk briefly about Copilot interactions. An interaction is pretty simple. You put in a prompt and you get a response. That is an interaction. Interactions are important, particularly from compliance standpoints and security standpoints and privacy standpoints. Interactions can be kept in the user's history so that the user can go back and refer to previous interactions, but the user also has the ability to delete them as well. That said, an admin can also use things like retention policies to retain these interactions, and including retention of the entire communication. That might include files that were provided to Copilot or files that Copilot came back as cited references in its output as well. Those interactions have implications with respect to privacy and security. So with respect to privacy, Copilot, as I hope you've heard several times this week, Copilot lives inside the Microsoft 365 service boundary. So it gets, by default, all of the privacy, all of the security, all of the protections that we give you as part of our terms of service with Microsoft 365. Copilot is bound by the security controls that you have in your tenant. Copilot data stays within your tenant boundary with certain exceptions. The exceptions being that data that you might allow to go out to Bing, for example. And again, just to reiterate, the prompts, The responses, the data that you provide to Copilot is not, and in fact cannot be used to train the LLMs in our data center. They are stateless. They cannot be updated in place. They can be replaced with a newer version of the LLM, which would come from OpenAI, but the instances that we have, we cannot update, augment, or add to them. Now, there's also a storage and retention implications. We recently announced that Copilot would be part of our multi-geo advanced data residency offerings. And so if you are a customer who uses those features, then Copilot interactions will be stored in a way that's compliant with that. And in fact, eventually, we will update this data location inside the M365 Admin Center to include an entry for Copilot so admins can go right in and see where their data is being stored. Okay, let's talk about some requirements and some recommendations. Now, obviously, there's some base license requirements. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is an add-on license. And to purchase the add-on license, you need to have a qualifying base license. But you may be aware that we've expanded Copilot accessibility to almost every license that we have, including most recently education offerings that are available through EES or cloud solution providers as well. As long as you have a base license, you should be able to buy Copilot. Now, if you go into the admin center and you try to do that, you might see this banner up at the top that says it's available for ordering, but if you search for Copilot as an available product, Copilot for Microsoft 365 might not show up. The reason for that likely has to do with the age of your tenant. If you have an older tenant, you most likely are covered under what we used to call the Microsoft Online Services Agreement, or MOSA. That is our legacy commerce. I'm not going to get too deep into the details, but we basically have two commerce systems in Microsoft 365 that allow you to buy stuff. The legacy commerce system, which was the MOSA, and the modern commerce, as we call it, which is simply the Microsoft Customer Agreement. Copilot for Microsoft 365 is available only through the Microsoft Customer Agreement, only through our modern commerce, which means if you don't have a Microsoft Customer Agreement, you will then see this dialogue asking you to create one and then execute one. Once you've done that, you've now transferred over your billing account into our modern commerce system, and at that point, you could go ahead and buy Copilot. So just be aware of that if you run into that. It's a very quick and easy process to get through, but it does catch some people off guard. Let's talk about the network. We recently updated our network guidance, and it's extremely important that you follow this network guidance, particularly with respect to things like WebSockets. If you block WebSockets, you simply won't have Copilot functionality in almost all of the apps. So you do have to allow external access to specific endpoints. We tried to simplify it by pointing out just those endpoints that are required, and again, all of this is in the documentation. But if you're blocking any of those endpoints, or like I said, if you're blocking WebSockets, you will need to unblock those or things simply won't work. Now, in terms of app and service requirements, obviously you need something called connected experiences. Connected experiences is where the apps can do round-trip conversations with the service itself, and it can get information on behalf of it. Copilot is a connected experience. You send something up to the service sends something back down to you from Copilot. Now, I know the requirements document, I've been told by many customers that it can be a little confusing because it makes it look like you need all of these things in order to have Copilot. So, for instance, some customers are wondering, why do I need Loop or Whiteboard if I need Copilot? And the answer is, you don't. You only need Loop and Whiteboard if you want to use Copilot in Loop or Whiteboard. And I know the content, again, could be a little confusing in that regard. So you only need the apps in which you want Copilot to appear. The other thing to keep in mind is we talk about Copilot in Outlook. Outlook, the documentation around that has not caught up to reality. The reality is the new Outlook, while it's preferred, is not required for Copilot. Copilot is in the classic or Win32 version of Outlook, and you can go and use that today. The only thing that I would call out is if you are a hybrid customer or if you're an on-premises customer, you cannot use Copilot against an on-premises mailbox. It has to be a cloud mailbox for you to use that. And it has to be a cloud user mailbox as well. Now, obviously, Copilot lives in the Microsoft 365 apps. You need the apps for that. But those apps also have to be on a specific update channel. Okay, if you're not on the right update channel, you're not getting Copilot updates, and again, things won't work for you. So it's important that you're on the right update channel. There's a lot of different ways an admin can configure the users to use the right update channel. We recommend Cloud Update because that's the easiest way to do that. All right, let me get through some tenant recommendations, and then I'll hand it over to Brian to go a little deeper on some of these. But the first thing is you want to adopt a zero trust policy, and you want to take the zero trust approach, which basically means trust nothing, or trust but verify, assume breach, always use least privilege, and so forth. And that applies to your users, to your data, and to your devices, basically your entire enterprise, if you will. In addition, you want to use some advanced features. There's a lot of security and compliance features that we have, both inside and outside of Microsoft Purview, that Copilot works very well with, and in fact, administrators are going to want to implement with respect to Copilot. And this could be things like auditing. Obviously, you want to have auditing turned on everywhere. You want to use e-discovery. You want to use communication compliance. You want to use classifications and sensitivity labels and all of those other Purview features that can help you protect not just your data, but also your Copilot interactions as well. You also want to use a generally high level of security. Entra ID has so many different features that you can use for that. MFA, conditional access, and so forth. And then Intune has a whole bunch of policies and other features that you can use to apply zero trust to your devices as well. The last thing I'll say before I hand it over is there's an order of operations to these as well. You want to apply the protections first. Then you can go ahead or apply the identity and access protections to the user, apply the access protections to your devices, and then at that point, you could go ahead and start deploying Copilot as well. There are some things that you could do in parallel, but generally we recommend at least you have the minimum security and compliance and privacy policies in place first, and then you can proceed with your rollout. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to take us to the next section.
Thanks, Scott. All right, folks, first and foremost, so I'm Brian Wofford. I'm a principal product manager in the Fast Track Center for Copilot. So my team has been working with early access customers for the past almost year now, working through a lot of the things that we've done. So a lot of stuff that Scott's been covering around recommendations, networking requirements, and helping customers to go through those processes and checkboxes, that's what my team does. So we put together, we have a team worldwide that can help through that. What I'm going to go through is information access optimization. So first, as a poll of hands, how many folks are already using Purview? I've already been through a lot of these pieces. Okay, it's a good amount. All right, so let's talk through what some of this means. And one of the things that I want you to take away from this is going through what oversharing means, right? So what this is that not every file or every site should be available to everyone in the organization, right? So that's an important lesson to kind of put in your hat. And a lot of this is you've got to remember that when you're doing things with Copilot and your users are doing things with Copilot, it's under that context. So Copilot's not granting extra access to anybody. It's not giving them access to things. But it is, if they've already got access to it, it can make it very easy to surface things that maybe weren't protected correctly, or maybe we didn't do anything with to protect before. So the second point here is if the adequate access controls aren't consistently applied, this can result in oversharing. So this might be something where there's a file on a SharePoint site that maybe they have access to that we didn't know, and now they're asking Copilot for the data within that, and Copilot's going to return it because they have access to it. Your files and your sites without restricted access are surfaced in internal search results, okay? So this means that because it's in an index, we can actually take a look at, and again, if anything that's in that site, that's the power of Copilot. And as Scott was saying, the LLM model is a point in time, right? So the way that we get additional data is we're looking at this graph data, and we're pulling from that to get answers that you're asking the prompt, or that you're prompting. However, admins can put controls in place to prevent oversharing, and they can use internal campaigns in order to educate their user base. So we're going to talk through a couple of those. So the first is optimizing information access. Okay, so public sites, public groups, you have sensitivity labels that you can use out there. This can be done with Purview, and you can go in and actually set up those labels so that you now, what we've seen in my team is that Copilot becomes the catalyst to Purview deployments, right? A lot of the customers that we're working with, it becomes I started down the Purview route, or I want to do things with Purview, and now I've got to go do it because of Copilot, because I want this data to be protected. Group sprawl. So group sprawl is controlling who can create your groups. So show of hands, how many folks have group sprawl already under control, where you've already got this locked down? Everybody in your org can't create groups, okay? A couple of hands here, thank you. So a lot of it is, and it's just really having, instead of everybody being able to do it, it's controlling who can. Doing auditing solutions, so looking at your user activity, so being able to monitor the activities that those users are doing. We can do this with our auditing solutions within Purview. And then last on this slide is external sharing. So you'll see the graphic over on the right-hand side where we're showing external sharing. So you can control who can share what, right, within the organization. You can actually you can go in and set that to whatever you would like. So this could be, I don't want certain things to be shared out. I want to allow specific things to be shared out. You have some controls around that. All right, optimizing information access. So lots of stuff on this slide. Don't get overwhelmed. So a lot of it is you do want to do things with data classification, right? So this is, again, that Purview concept of going through and making sure that your sensitive files, your high-value sites, those are the ones that you're paying attention to first. What I've seen is typically that folks are going through, and as they're enabling Copilot for their users, we start to look at what sites those users have access to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But we want to restrict access to a specific group, and maybe you can do things with, you can also do things with custom labels, and then you can scope those to the group, right? So there's some stuff that you can do in there. And again, all these things that you see on the slide, these are all hyperlinks out to documents. You guys are going to get a copy of the deck afterwards, so you're welcome to go into some of these and dig in a little further. We can restrict file and site sharing between groups using information barriers. So again, if you've got certain groups within your organization that can't share data or shouldn't share data between themselves, we can do that with some of our information barriers. Setting a default sensitivity label policy, okay, and requiring users to label their documents and emails. So default sensitivity label policy is where we're going in and certain sites, we're setting their default sensitivity to confidential maybe, or something similar. So if I know it's a high-value site, and I know that all the data is in there is going to be confidential or highly confidential, I can set that. Or I can go through and do that up front. Preventing files from appearing in their recent list. So we can do this. We can do this by turning off delve. So this is one of those where if you don't want that recent list to keep showing up for the users, you can go through that. You can also prevent those files from appearing in a recent file list at the group level. So this is something we can do. It's an item insights piracy in Graph. So this is in a preview state right now, and you'll see the link here to go a little further. Last on this slide is using data loss prevention to create oversharing pop-ups in Outlook. Okay, so what this is that DLP is not specific to Copilot. And in fact, everything that I've gone through on this slide is not specific to Copilot. This is just data, good optimizing the information access across the board. These are just things that we start to see. And as customers are starting to implement Copilot and they're thinking through the data aspects, this is just kind of getting your search house in order, right? It's getting everything cleaned up, it's getting everything labeled, it's getting everything into that state. So when you're talking to your executives and you're starting to roll this out, you have confidence that I've done the data protection pieces of this, my users are going to be able to use this like I want them to. And as Scott was saying, there's a lot of things that we do in Purview. So if I'm doing queries of confidential documents, the queries that come back, the prompts that come back are going to be confidential, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff that we're doing in that space. So this gets into a little bit of a more advanced section here. What this is using conditional access on your SharePoint sites and your OneDrive. So this is, you're accessing it and you're managing it by the sensitivity labels. The picture you see over here on the right is I can choose, as they're accessing that site, to cause MFA, right? So I can cause an additional area, or I can make it where they can only get to it within certain things. So standard conditional access rules apply here, and you can determine what those are going to be. So again, high-value sites, things that are highly confidential, this is where you would use this potentially and go in and you would set this up where you're going to have an additional layer of protection around when that user can access that and how, like maybe we're doing a second prompt or something like that. Okay? You can also use site lifecycle management to detect, remediate, and report on inactive sites. Okay, so what this is basically saying we're going to go out and set our policy scope, and we're going to set an amount of time. In the graphic here you see 6 months. And what this does is it starts to set up where you're having data that maybe is at rest and not being used or not being active, and you're going out and actually polling and saying, hey, are you still using the site? Because if we're not, then maybe we want to put it into an archive state. right? We want to take it out of the mix. So that's one of the things that we do with this site lifecycle management. And again, this is not new, not specific to Copilot, but it's also one of those where if the data is just sitting there, if it's in SharePoint, we can see it. Copilot can see it, so you can start to take things out. It's just good data management here. All right, data access governance reports. How many folks, show of hands, have SharePoint Premium, SharePoint Advanced Management, have heard about pieces of this? Okay, a couple. All right, good. So the data access governance reports is one of the things that we help customers through and help them run, and we've seen this where it's basically looking at sites that are overshared or that have sensitive content in them. So this report gives you a list out of all the SharePoint sites that are out there and shows you kind of the links that are available, the types of data that are out there, and helps you go through some of that process. So you will see some things, and again, these are in advanced, so you're going to see some pieces in there. Next slide here is site access restriction policies. So what this is doing is I can go in and I can restrict the site to a specific group of people. And I'm going in and saying, well, they only have access to that one site, right? So this is just like top-level controls of making sure that SharePoint's in good. And you've got policy restrictions that you can put in place here. So what you'll see here is that being able to go in and set who's going to have access to that and using those policies to do that, okay? Restricted SharePoint search. Okay, so restricted SharePoint search is, it's in preview still, but let's talk about this for a minute. So a lot of people have questions about this, and it's a very unique tool that we're doing, but I want to dig in just a little bit. There is a link that goes into the articles here. I want you to take away that this is not the end-all be-all solution, right? This is a temporary solution to get you up and running on Copilot quickly. What restricted SharePoint search does is it basically takes all of your SharePoint sites out of from what Copilot's going to be able to see. Okay, so then what you're going to do is you will go through and pick out your high-value sites or sites that your users are going to have access to, your Copilot users that you're licensing, and you're going to do your due diligence on the data, and then you're going to add that site into the allow list, which then makes that content available to Copilot. So the reason that we did this is there's a lot of feedback from you guys, and basically it's like we want to get up and running on Copilot very quickly, and we know that Purview potentially could take us some time if we haven't started down that Purview route yet. So this lets you get up and running very quickly. Now this does not eliminate the ability for you to see your email data or your chat data or the user's OneDrive data. All of that's still available to Copilot. This is only on the SharePoint side of the house. So one of the things that my team works with customers on is getting this turned on if you need it, not a requirement, but then working with you to get through some of the data assignment pieces and some of the things I've shown you in the other slides so that you're in that good state, and then eventually you do want to turn this back off, right? You do want to get to where all of your data is flowing through so you can get that good, rich content that you want out of Copilot. Okay, so a couple of things there. Going through, I'm going to hand over to Gabe to go through some of the adoption and usage pieces. And I know we didn't go super deep. I know there's a lot of links in here, and we'll cover if there's questions at the end. Gabe, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome, thank you. My name's Gabe Ho. I am a product marketing manager on the Copilot team, and in case it wasn't clear, I'm also the youngest person on this stage.
You sure about that?
I thought about that one a lot before I said it. I'm here to talk to you about the human aspect of adopting Copilot and getting ready for Copilot. It'd be remiss if we didn't include this after all the technical readiness that Scott and Brian just walked everyone through. It's easy to neglect or forget or de-emphasize how important it is to ensure that your users are also upskilled and ready to adopt Copilot once you do assign those licenses. It is also a work stream that can run in parallel with the technical readiness that we're doing. Again, like what Brian said, a lot of what was just covered are things that aren't necessarily related to Copilot, but are just aspects of a well-managed and healthy tenant. And so as you're going through that process, it's also equally as important to realize that we need to upskill our users. Leveraging generative AI and using Copilot does involve changing my work habits. I know I've had to change my work habits. I've had to change the way I think about a task or completing a task, and building new habits, learning new skills, how to query Copilot, how to write a prompt. Those are things that we don't want to forget, because ultimately this all comes back to ROI, return on investment, and accelerating that. And so ensuring that you're creating a path forward is going to be very important to do that. We do have a dedicated session on driving adoption and best practices and strategies to do that in this very room after the lunch break. So for a deeper dive on that, I highly recommend everyone come back and listen to Caruana talk about that. But some key ingredients, even as you're thinking about starting Copilot, that you really want to make sure you have aligned. The first is, of course, an executive sponsor. This typically is the person at the top somewhere within your organization who has the authority and corporate capital to drive decision-making, to enforce decision-making, and to be that voice that brings out the message, that authoritative voice that brings out the message when you're deploying Copilot. Think of this as your biggest hammer. When you have different organizations, different teams who may not be on board with wanting to adopt Copilot or a new tool in general, an executive sponsor is a great way and a forcing function to get the message across. You also want to identify scenarios and work streams that are going to, that you want to resolve or attack with Copilot. A lot of times, I think, even at this conference, I've spoken to customers, they want to adopt Copilot. They have Copilot, but they haven't necessarily thought about what they want Copilot to do for their organization. Having that in mind, starting with these are the scenarios exactly, HR, marketing, finance, whatever it might be, understanding and being clear on who you want to use Copilot and what you want them to use Copilot for is really going to help you drive your metrics of success, but also identify who are these people I should emphasize or prioritize in deploying my licenses, getting them skilled, and figuring out how I can really focus adoption on these scenarios. Tackle that first, and then you can iterate and keep going and expanding. But that's what we found to be a very effective strategy when we're working with our early access program customers and even rolling it out within Microsoft ourselves. So you can break that down into 3 phases when we think about it. We want to identify those scenarios. Once you've identified them, think about how you can concentrate those licenses in those key areas. We do also here, like, we purchase Copilot, we want to use it, and I've assigned it to my executive team because they're our most important people in our organization. But always remembering that the function and the role and the work that executives may do vastly differ from what an end user who's a worker in your organization does. And so their value propositions, the way they use Copilot and the way it can help them are going to differ vastly. And if you want to get a good picture and a great idea of success for how Copilot is doing in your organization, you want to think about how you can sprinkle those licenses around to key individuals within that organization so that it does a few things. One, it gets enough people talking in your organization to get conversations going, get a little bit of excitement going, maybe a little bit of jealousy because they have Copilot while others might not. It also then gives you a scalable motion to roll out Copilot to the rest of your organization. As an IT admin, it may be daunting to say, I need to roll it out, I need to train 200, 300, thousands of people. But if you follow a champion model and you identify key individuals within their function, you can win those people over as primary stakeholders in a train-the-trainer model, leverage them, leverage their leadership to drive change within their organizations so that 1, it's not on you, but 2, it's also much more effective when a message is coming from someone I'm familiar with and someone I respect within my team or organization than it is from someone outside trying to force me to change and do something. Measurement as well. So we have a few tools. I'll talk about the Copilot dashboard in a second, a little bit. But measuring and being clear, it always starts with what scenarios we want to cover. So when you identify clearly what the scenarios you want to go after, how you want them to use Copilot, then the metrics start making more sense. You can start really getting a good idea of whether or not Copilot is being healthily adopted within your organization because you have a clear framework for what you want out of it to start with. And that's where you just iterate over that process, identifying department by department, function by function, or group by group as you go down the line, and create a really scalable way to, one, skill your users, get them familiar with Copilot, running this in parallel with technical readiness so they feel comfortable when you do release licenses, and also gives you that feedback loop and insight to how it's going, how your materials are landing, is the skilling making sense, do they enjoy using Copilot, and being able to collect all that information and iterate on it so you can really be successful and drive your ROI as quickly as possible. Awesome, so this slide is a lot, but just to overlay how you could do it with technical readiness as a work stream. When you think about the start, getting ready, it covers some assets here too as well. We've released a scenario library that is a collection of scenarios that Copilot can really help you adopt, depending on your job function across marketing, HR, finance, etc. And be able to help you get a sense for what Copilot could do for your scenarios and where you'd really want to target it. When you're thinking about onboarding and engaging, Copilot Lab is an experience that is embedded within our Copilot apps, and it's also standalone. It gives the user a library, a prompt library of prompts that are really effective, well written, and they can click on it and it immediately populates within the Copilot app, whichever Canvas or BizChat they might be using. This is a great way, one, for users to get a tactile feel for what Copilot could do for them across the different apps. But also, once they click it and they see the prompt come up in the canvas, it gives them a better idea, a really clear idea of what a good prompt looks like. We also have a survey kit, and this is within the adoption website that I'll cover in a second, but it gives you, as an IT, a set of resources that are ready to go for you to leverage, to send out to your users so you can get feedback and input from them so you don't have to recreate the wheel. Microsoft is providing as many resources as possible to make it as easy as possible for IT to roll this out. And lastly, the point there really is enjoy the wins. When you scale and when you build your scenarios, enjoy those wins. Reinforce early and often, and really get close with your stakeholders, with your champions, so that we can start building that excitement, building that acceleration, and really finding ways to embrace Copilot, because the change is, in general, pretty difficult, and teams have to manage that. So celebrate those wins early and often. Awesome. So in terms of how to measure success, we also do have dedicated sessions on the Copilot dashboard that I highly recommend people attend. But as a high level, the Copilot dashboard is a view that gives you high-level metrics of Copilot readiness, adoption, how your organization is doing, some sentiment levels, and it's available for people with the Copilot for M365 license. That gives you high-level organizational metrics on how your company is doing in terms of adopting Copilot. If you do have a Microsoft Viva license, or if you do purchase one at the same time as Copilot, that would give you access to deeper metrics within the Copilot dashboard to see within your organization which teams may be adopting Copilot better. So it gives you a double click if you have a Viva license. If you don't have a Viva license, this will still give you a lot of great information, but at the organizational level. Now, to cover some resources that we wanted to share. Firstly, the Copilot tech community, Copilot for M365 tech community. If any of you are already active in there, you might have seen me posting around and join discussions, but create an account, join in the discussion. We have thousands of people in there who are all adopting Copilot at the same time, asking questions. We host events often. We've been hosting a monthly AMA in the tech community, so I highly recommend you join, take advantage of those. It is free to join. We also have an admin documentation hub, and this is what we've tried to do to bring together a one-stop shop for all Copilot for M365 related documentation that we constantly update and keep fresh. So it's a single place for you to be able to find what you're looking for ideally. This is the adoption site that I talked about. We have a whole host of resources here. We have things broken down by persona that we'll see in a second. But also I want to call out the new Copilot Success Kit. The session right after this, after lunch, will go in depth into how you can use the Success Kit to really get the most out of your adoption for Microsoft 365. But that's where you would get it, on the adoption site. We also have roles broken down by scenario so that you can think about, as you're thinking about your all-up adoption strategy, who are the players involved, how would they get involved, and how you can best leverage them, as well as additional resources for you to plan your adoption strategy and drive it. For those in small, medium businesses, which I think in general at Microsoft is a bit of a misnomer because SMBs span anywhere from sole proprietors to companies with thousands of employees. I know I work with a lot of them. But we do have a dedicated space for people who may not have tens of thousands of licenses or seats, and you have a different set of unique problems that we want to make sure that we can bring and try and tackle as well with you. So we do have a dedicated space on adoption.microsoft.com for SMBs with a whole host of other resources there as well. And this is the scenario library that I talked about. So this is a new site. This gives you an idea of what Copilot could do for your various users in different parts of your organization. If you're even thinking about Copilot and you're curious about what Copilot could do, aside from all the demos and features that we've shown, this would be a great spot to go and see how it could benefit different people within your organization. Work Lab. I'd be remiss to not talk about the wonderful folks that work on the Work Trend Index. It is a comprehensive study involving, trillions of data points to understand the future of work, where work is going. A lot of work was done, as we understand, during the pandemic and everyone moving to remote culture, and now what that looks like and the shifting landscape of how companies operate and what might keep you on the competitive edge of it, what your peers are doing. We do a huge study on that. All the research is always published on the Work Lab site, so I highly recommend reading and checking that out as well. Copilot Lab, I talked about that a little bit. This will give you all the prompts that you need within the app, but also if you go on there, you'll see a library of prompts that are pre-baked. We are constantly working on enhancing that as well. So at some point in the future, I know we'll be working on giving you the ability to upload your own prompts so that you can share them within your organization and things like that. So also make sure you bookmark that link. Copilot for Work also has a host of additional resources on how Copilot can be working, Copilot in action, if you're looking for assets to share with your C-suite, your executive committee, your executive leadership. There's a bunch of resources on there on how you can pitch and portray Copilot to your organizations as well. The Copilot roadmap is where we are folding in all our enhancements. So this is not new, but we are folding in our enhancements. We have a filter for Copilot features that we'll be rolling out. We're always constantly doing a lot of improvements here. And we've broken it out into phases. So if you click on the Copilot filter, you'll be able to look at features that are coming and in development now, features that are in the process of being rolled out, and features that are fully launched. So if you want to look at a peek at what's coming ahead, how it might be useful for you, or just to plan your deployments in future, definitely keep an eye out on the roadmap. Lastly, Fast Track. Brian, do you want to talk
absolutely. So this is, again, this is the org that I'm in. So Fast Track is an organization within Microsoft that can help you to deliver all the things that we've talked about. So if you've dealt with Fast Track before with other enablements, we're doing lots of things in the Copilot space. All the things that I covered in terms of trying to get things set up, trying to go through some of the purview deployments. Scott talked about Intune. We talked about things with Exchange and SharePoint and all that. Fast Track can help with all those pieces. Fasttrack.microsoft.com is how you get into the mix there if you need to request help from us. We got SMEs that are standing by to help through this process. And then lastly, and I'll put these onto the slides as we go through, there's also if you go to setup.microsoft.com, there are a lot of really good deployment guides that are out there. So a lot of the things that we're doing in my team is, as I was covering some of those different pieces to think through, and Scott was covering some of those recommendations, that requirements, setup.microsoft.com/copilot will take you to our deployment guide that walks you through all of that. And that's one thing that we're very dedicated and passionate about keeping updated. So as new things are coming out, we're adding things into that guide. So some of the things that Scott's covered, some of the stuff that Gabe's covered, we're putting all of that in that kind of one-stop shop for you out there. Thank you for your time. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. Hopefully you got some really good content out of this. And if you guys want to walk up, if you've got questions, we'll try to fill it as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you.